This is WOBC Oberlin 91.5 FM, Oberlin College and Community Radio. My name is Peter Cummings, and this is Oberlin. What kind of week has it been? Is this an Oberlin kind of week? Tell you what, for me, it's that sickness kind of week. From fever to head cold, and that's all and more that you ever cared to know, except that if I sound an octave deeper than I did, it's still me. My guest this week is Scott Medwood. Say hi, Scott.
How you doing, folks?
We will be all over the map today for sure, but in particular, we'll be talking about hemp and thorium. I think I'd probably still have to look up thorium to say more than just the name of it and know anything about it. But that's what you're here for. The idea behind the show is this. I grew up here. I moved away for 20 years, and although I live here again now, I don't work here, so I don't know a lot about what's going on in town. That's what everybody else in town is going to come in here and tell me. And when they come in and tell me, I'm sharing it with you. So hope you enjoy. All right, Scott, you're a neighbor to my parents. I think that's got to be where I first met you, although if I wanted to guess somewhere else, I could say the FEV or just walking around through Oberlin almost anywhere. You're a guy that I think people walking through Oberlin would know by sight and almost assuredly by name.
Yep. Well, first off, I'm 6'6", and my office is up on Tappan Square. So I'm the guy that has Massage Therapy Oberlin, and my wife and I and my two daughters, we've been here in town for 18 years, and we moved here from the Cleveland area, and I love it here. I mean, honestly, it's like friends of mine will say, "Hey, we hardly ever see you here or there," and it's like I'm not really agoraphobic, but I'm definitely, if there's an agoraphobic for leaving town, I mean that's kind of me. I mean, I can go weeks without leaving the city boundaries, or maybe get out into the townships or something like that. But I ride my bicycle around here, walk a lot, and just it's a great town. So,
all right, when we moved back, my family, a few years ago, it wasn't too long before traveling more among the Oberlin circles, you and I connected more often. Of course, you're good friends with my brothers, and especially Bruce. You might talk to a lot about some of the same shared interests that you two have. Yeah. Among those, I think, would be industrial hemp. I think you could both find a good way to have a conversation about that. But probably a year after, so maybe 3 or 4 years ago, you and I got to talking, and we started into a piece about industrial hemp. I interviewed you for probably a couple of days, came and visited you in your garage there, took some pictures. I've got some of the photos that I'll put up on ohoberlin22214.com if I think about it later in the week. But I wanted to read from the beginning of that because it gives some of my sense of you as a Renaissance man here in town, and maybe helps give a little background to some of the topics. And we will censor this just a very little bit because we're not broadcasting during the safe harbor time. So you started by saying, and I quote, "I'm civil disobedient," Oberlin, Ohio resident Scott Medwood said on a hot spring afternoon. What to some could sound like a casual remark from Medwood sounds like deep-seated emotion. All the more so when heard in his garage, surrounded by 600 kilograms of industrial hemp he imported from Canada just to prove it could be done. Federal House Bill 1831, a proposed amendment to the Federal Controlled Substances Act, is 17 lines of changed language to the law that could be worth $400 million, according to the Hemp Industries Association of California. Nobody seemed to have their hands on industrial hemp fiber, said Medwood. You can get the value-added product. You can get the oils, the seed meals. You can get the building materials. You can import all this stuff, but you can't grow it. Medwood, who had been straining cooking oil for use as a car fuel, put down what he was doing and wiped his hands on his pants. Walking inside and up a narrow flight of stairs, the second-floor rafter was filled with bales of dried stalks. He sorted through 2 coolers to find different lengths of hemp fibers. It's all because of a blockage at the federal level. The markets are here. Granted, it's a niche product as far as the agricultural market is concerned, but the farmers and producers who are growing it are seeing growth every year, said Medwid. It was a lot of fun coming over and talking to you, and in what I do in my line of work as a journalist, I've always enjoyed talking to people and hearing their stories and seeing them in their own situation. But the picture I have of you draining some cooking oil, I think, in front of your garage, and then the hemp fibers, you really seem to live the story you're telling. So we're a few years later now, and in fact, there's probably an update that you'd be best suited to give about industrial hemp. What's going on, and where have things gone in the intervening years?
These are exciting times in the hemp world, and also for the cannabis plant in general. It's the recent farm bill that just got passed and signed by President Obama. And it held a provision called the Hemp Legitimization Provision, and this is going to allow states that have hemp farming provisions at the state level to apply to the federal government to get hemp farming permits, to do test plots, to see how it works with their state regulations and everything. And back when I got my load back in November of 2009, it was something that was always hoped for. Hemp advocates had been working at it, but the crop had been grown up in Canada since 1999, and they started their process to legalize and legitimize the crop back in 1992. So it was like a 6-year. The government did a study. The guy that I actually imported my hemp from, Gordon Shifley from Tavistock, Ontario, was one of the 3 fiber scientists for one of the Ontario agriculture colleges that looked into hemp and thought, it's like, well, we used to grow it here back in the day, and before Prohibition set in, which was a follow-on to American policy from 1937, and the Marijuana Tax Stamp Act, which it was a revenue tax, supposedly, where the federal government was going to issue a stamp to allow farmers to legally grow hemp and cannabis, but they were calling it marijuana. And when the law was passed, the governments did not issue stamps. And you couldn't get stamps until World War II, when we had a fiber crop shortage, rope shortage, canvas shortage, because we weren't getting these fibers from our overseas markets that actually had supplanted the American hemp market. And but it got cut off by Japanese incursions into the Pacific, and then also the European War. So we were stuck, and in 1941, the government concocted a plan so that they would get as many farmers as possible in 42, 43, and 44 to start growing hemp. So that was the Hemp for Victory campaign. So, and it was, and you can actually go to YouTube and you can type in Hemp for Victory, and you can see the 15-minute government film that that they did back then and showed all across the country to get farmers to start growing hemp. And it was a wild success. And, American farmers stepped up, and the government issued tax stamps, and they had crops coming in until about 1955, until the Navy and the Army had as much hemp and that they needed, and they stopped issuing stamps. So, but
do you still have some of the fiber in your garage area there?
A constant, well, not a constant, but it is a sore point in the household. But yeah, I'm down to about 300 pounds now. So
okay. And what have you done with that?
I've been dispersing it. So I've been a lot of it I've been giving away to folks that want to make some paper, or they want to experiment with some of the crops. I've also been donating it to activists that are working for hemp and everything, so they can actually have a bundle. And it's like they're usually the stalks are about 5 foot, 6 foot foot long, and they can have a bundle of it, and when they're talking to their legislators, they can say, this is the evil weed right here. This is what it is, And then part of the story is how I brought it into the country and everything, and which is just it was crazy. So,
how long a trip was it?
To bring it, it took me 3 months to work through the federal government to actually come up with an importation protocol. So, but
I don't know anybody else, frankly, who would maybe have had the patience or the interest. Now, that may just be the circle that I run with, that I don't know anybody else, but it sounds like it had to be more than just an idea. Oh, you know what? Maybe I'm going to go up to Canada and bring home some hemp.
Well, it started out as an idea, and I was sitting in the FEV and talking to some friends, and it's like, man, I'd love to just bring some Canadian hemp down, and because I had found out about this, that there was a hemp farming day. It's the beauty of the internet. I mean, the kids today, you don't know how lucky you are and everything. But the internet's a fantastic tool for gaining information. If you have questions, it's going to provide answers, and you can do some extensive research. And I stumbled upon the Ontario Hemp Farmers Alliance and found out that they were going to have a field day. I think it was like August 15th of 2009, and I took my wife and my daughter in our grease-powered Mercedes sedan and drove up to Canada and spent the day up there, and it was, we took a walk through a field that had been cut like in maize style, so like a corn maze, but this was a hemp maze, and then heard some great folks talking about the crop, and then there were vendors there that had fabric, rope, they had composite boards, so you could take the chip from the woody core of the plant, chip that up, add some resin to it, and then it turns into like a chipboard. So like you would have like wood chipboard that you would find at your Builder's Square or Carter Lumber, and preferably Carter Lumber on Route 20 in Oberlin, Ohio. And but it's good. It's good material. And there's companies in Canada and in the United States that are taking Canadian hemp and they're turning it into value-added products. And it's not just the seed head that you would use hemp for, which is a great food. I eat hemp seed every day in some fashion, either hemp oil, hemp seed meal, hemp protein powder. I'll take like peanut butter and jelly on bread and then cover that with hemp seeds and then crunch that up for breakfast. Man, it's good stuff. And it's like, and for me, it's like I'm just over 200 pounds. I'm 6'6", and it's like my weight is like completely regulated. I mean, I'm taking no pharmaceuticals whatsoever. I hardly ever have to take any pain relievers, and it's worked really well for me. And people that integrate hemp into their diets, they tend to be a lot healthier. So.
This is WOBC Oberlin 91.5 FM, Oberlin College and Community Radio. This is Oberlin, a radio show about Oberlin, because I want to know more about where I live. My co-DJ, Tom Geller, is out of town this week. Wish him well wherever he might be. Maybe Columbus, maybe what he told me. Our guest today is Scott Medwid, who has joined us to talk about, among other things, his adventures in importing hemp and political discussions about thorium. Scott, before we move on to talk about thorium, as far as the hemp goes, among the states that have at the state level legalized industrial hemp, Ohio's not among those.
Ohio's not among them. There is a bill in our state legislature for an Ohio Industrial Hemp Farming Act. Kentucky passed a hemp farming act last year. Most folks, especially the medicinal cannabis people and the pot smokers, know that Colorado and Oregon have legalized completely within the states. California has had medical marijuana. Other states, I think there's about 10 or more states that have industrial hemp farming, another 10 states or so that have medical marijuana provisions. The two states, Colorado, like I said, Colorado and Oregon, that are completely legal at the state level, but it's still illegal at the federal level, and that's the big fear and the holdback on the industry right now. I mean, I run into people, and I say, it's like, you should think about getting hemp into your diet, but they're afraid that they're going to test positive for THC because they're in a job that requires drug testing, and the government has a zero tolerance for THC in the blood or other cannabinoids. So there are two bills that are actually at the federal legislature right now, and in the House, it's H.R. 525, the Industrial Hemp Farming Act of 2013, and in the Senate, it is S. 359, and that's the Industrial Hemp Farming Act of 2013. Now, they don't quite mesh. So if both of the bills get out of committee and then get voted on by their legislatures, then there's going to have to be a conference committee to mesh the bills together. But this past Wednesday, I'm actually an activist speaking on hemp issues for the Ohio Rights Group, which is that we're working in the state right now to get people to sign petitions to put up a bill in the actually, it's a ballot provision to allow an amendment to the state constitution to allow cannabis, the whole range of cannabis, for Ohio citizens, and so that's going on right now. But we were down at Senator Brown's office in Cleveland, and you saw my posting on Facebook when I was up there on the 17th floor of the Erie View Plaza Tower.
A much different picture during the summer, I'm sure, than it was during the winter.
And but we talked with two of the staff people there, and the senior legislative or the senior liaison for constituents, and the office manager, and we had somebody there, a veteran, that was talking about the use of medical marijuana, and then John and Linda Pardee were talking about other aspects of medical marijuana, and then me and Lauren Bellenkamp, who I met years ago at a permaculture training out at the Jones farm. We were there talking about hemp. And it was very positive, and I think Senator Brown and possibly Senator Portman are going to come in on the bill. I'm hopeful. But it's inevitable. It's like it's going to be grown. Hemp is going to be grown, federally recognized this next year in 5 states, and and we have all these states right now and all this commerce that's going on right now across the other states that have medical marijuana and the recreational. But because of federal laws, once again, people can't do banking and everything. Banks won't touch the money that's coming in, and people have to pay their wages in cash to their workers. They have to pay their insurance in cash. They have to pay their taxes in cash, and that's dangerous. I mean, it's a dangerous situation, and it's a dangerous way to do commerce. So
you talk about a guy who doesn't like maybe leaving town that often, but certainly the topics you're talking about are nationwide. You must have contacts all across the country,
and that's it's like telephone and the internet and the mail and everything. It's like when I'm shipping my tubes of hemp to activists, it goes right to the U.S. mail in downtown Oberlin, and we worked out a little protocol there where I put my importation information on the outside. It's stamped, "This is legal hemp imported." I've got copies of my my importation form from Customs and Border Patrol, and it was an adventure. It's been a real adventure and everything. But
I'm sure there were more steps between the two, but from a little bit of a distance, as you and I had been talking about hemp for a year or so, then suddenly-ish, I see you on Facebook talking about thorium, and I run into you and you're talking about thorium, and to the untrained eye, it looks like quite a jump, talking about hemp and then talking about nuclear energy.
Sure.
But thorium isn't just your average Joe nuclear reaction, or doesn't provide the material for the normal reaction, right? How did you get from being involved in hemp to this whole thorium project? What came in between?
I will pull together the unified theory of Scott Medwid and his motivation, and this all makes sense, and you don't have to smoke a joint for it to make sense and everything. Not that I'm advocating it unless it's legal and you're 21 and whatnot, but no, in 1978. President Carter was in office, and we got into trouble with Iran, and we had hostages taken, and the war drums were beating and everything, and they instituted a draft. And so the second round of people that had to sign up for the draft, I was one of them. So I had my selective. I went into the post office, I signed my selective service, and it sure as heck looked like I was going to be serving one way or another, and so it's like, do I get drafted, or I'm looking at, do I get drafted, or do I just sign up and volunteer? But luckily nothing happened then. But that got me thinking about, why were we looking to go into war? Why were we tangling around with Iran and everything? And it had to do with energy, and it had to do with oil and fuel and how we fuel our economies and everything. And it's the basic destabilizer that I've seen, in all of my adult life and everything. Energy has been the key thing that has been like the limiting factor and the big danger I've seen in my life and everything. So, and so I came at environmentalism as a way to, we're going to have to develop new energy because oil is unstable. And then I started reading more, and I found out about climate change, and this is stuff that people had been studying and postulating about going back over like a century and a half, but the data started to accumulate as we started doing more and more scientific collecting. When we started getting satellites up in the late 60s, and then started comparing them to like ice masses in the polar regions from like the late 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and then just climate data planet wide, we're seeing changes, and then there's also population's growing, and in some areas it's stabilizing, and when it stabilizes, it's usually because people have access to energy, and usually that's about 2,000 kilowatts and everything. A friend of mine, who I've actually met in person, and also I'm a friend of his on Facebook and everything, but Robert Hargrave, and he's from Dartmouth. He studied at Dartmouth. He's got some companies, but he's looked into energy issues, and he's got a fantastic book that you can get for $9.99 on Amazon Prime and it's called Thorium Energy Cheaper Than Coal. And it's a thick book. It's got a ton of information in it, and just the table of contents alone is kind of like a cliff notes of how we got into the situation we're in, and how we can get out and everything. And but the hemp I got into because it's a building material. You take that inner core, you can build walls, you can build mass walls that you can mix it with sand and water and clay and a little bit of Portland cement, and mix it up, and then you can put it in forms, and it cross ties. The hemp fiber will cross tie, and then it'll lithify and harden up. So you can build a wall 30 centimeters or like a foot thick, and you can have. It's not necessarily called insulation, but it's thermal mass, and you can build thicker if you want. But it's something that you can grow on a plot of land. You can take the stalks. You can have the seeds to harvest. So that's one crop. And then now you've got the stalks that you can process and use for the building materials. And then the land that you grow the hemp on, it's you get this amazing ability. It's a soil conditioner. And back in the day when we used to grow hemp down in Kentucky and Wisconsin and other hemp regions in this country, it was always known as a follow-on to corn because it was a soil conditioner. And so it would just improve the soil. So that's how I got into that. And then like the whole thing with grease, running grease cars, back in 2000, 2002, a squeaky clean young Oberlin student that was taking environmental sciences with John Peterson, who I know, Professor Peterson. He wanted to build a biodiesel digester. And this is something I'd read about in Mother Earth News years ago. And so when this young kid came knocking on my door and was like, Mr. Medwin, Professor Peterson said I could talk to you about it, and maybe I could borrow your welder and make an oil, you know. And so... And my policy with college students when they're asking me, and if they have persistence and they can survive me blowing them off twice with a little bit of hope at the end, if they come back that third time, I'll help them. And so Sam came back, and then we welded up his first biodiesel digester, and then he was really into it. He was doing some work with the some co-op people on it, and I actually encouraged him to, I said, you should get into this for a business, and you should do this here in town. And he actually started a business on Main Street, Full Circle Fuels. It's now the Oberlin Auto Clinic, and it's run by Joe Antelak and everything. But you can get your grease cars serviced. You can take a diesel car, you can get it, or diesel truck or diesel semi, and get it converted there to run on vegetable oil as a fuel. So, and which is... it's a fossil carbon-free energy source. Mm-hmm. So, and it's basically a waste product the way I pick it up at the restaurants. I provide a service to restaurants where I will collect that oil, filter it, but it's like they don't have to pay for disposal of it. So
sure. What gets filtered out of there?
Well, you want to filter, like when you're using used cooking oil, you're going to have fines from fine particles, and if not, just bits of French fries or fried pierogies or fish fry or whatever.
Sure.
So I run it through a gross filter to take the big chunks out, and then I'll run it through a fine 5-micron bag filter, and then that 5-micron bag filter will take the fine parts out, and then it'll give you a fluid that will squirt in a diesel injector, just like diesel fuel will, if it's hot enough. So. Mm-hmm. And all you have to do, like I say, you have to put a separate fuel system in your vehicle to put grease in there, and then that pumps to your diesel injector up at the front of the engine, and then you use that as a fuel. So,
well, you make light of your own wording there about how it's just a matter of, but
right.
In some ways, you're creating your own context, your own set of circumstances, such that really you could almost say it is just a matter of this. It's
just plumbing. So really, I mean, yeah,
you're just choosing that route,
right,
instead of getting a gasoline powered car, right, and having to worry about
fuels.
Fossil fuels, or understanding combustion in that
right.
engine, or spark plugs are spark plugs maybe, or maybe they're not when you're going from unleaded regular to fine grade cooking oil after it's been...
with a diesel you don't have spark, or you don't have a spark plug. You have compression, and that compression will cause the fuel and the air to ignite, and so it works without the spark. I mean, you still have electronics and everything, but
that, kids, is what it means to be a Renaissance man, to be able to say on the fly, well, there is no spark plug in there. I'm sure there are diesel mechanics all over who could have said the same thing, but thank you for clearing up some of the mechanics of it for me.
It's all on the internet.
Speaking of which, we'll do our public service announcement and be right back.
BPSA is an alternative national youth organization that is looking to expand in the Northern Ohio region. The BPSA's traditional scouting program focuses on learning outdoor skills and community service. If you are interested in learning more about this coeducational, inclusive program, more information and resources about joining or starting a new group in your area can be found at www.bpsa-us.org or by calling 636-542-8855.
This is WOBC Oberlin 91.5 FM, Oberlin College and Community Radio. My name is Peter Cummings. You're listening to Oberlin, which I think we've decided to say this week as Oberlin, the sickness that goes around, the colds this time of year. We're living with about 2.5 in my household right now. Our guest today, and my co-DJ, Tom Geller, is out of town, by the way, but my guest is Scott Medwid, local Renaissance man. We've talked about hemp, we've talked about grease-powered cars, and your requirement for Oberlin College students to solicit your help. And what we have yet to get around to, and I'm sure we can take the next logical step now, is how do we get to thorium?
How do we get to thorium? Okay. As I think I was talking about earlier, it's like I see, as well as a lot of great other great minds. No, I mean other people that I have read. Dr. Hansen from NASA. There's climatologist, famous climatologist that's been cited by a lot of the environmental press. Really banging the drum on the warnings for climate change. He and 4 other scientists came out with a statement to the environmental community saying it's like you really have to look, if you're going to be serious about reducing fossil carbon and reducing CO2 in the atmosphere, you got to get serious about a power switch, and that's going to be reactors. You're going to need nuclear reactors, and which was a major watershed for people in the like me in the advanced reactor advocacy community, and so when you do an apples to apples comparison for safety of energy, there's a factor. There's an equation that a friend of mine up in Canada came up with, and it's megawatt deaths per megawatt. So how many megawatts are generated for a given power source before there is a fatality in the generation of that of that power? And in average, it's about, I don't have the numbers, but by and far the largest, the safest power source is nuclear power, and then hydropower, and then solar power, and then wind power, or like gas is up there too, and then you get into the solar, and then the wind, and then the coal, and if you have the average, and I want to say the number for the average is like this unit is 300, coal is like 140, and then gas goes up from there, and wind and solar, but nuclear power is, it's like 87,000. It's a crazy factor, and if anyone's interested, once again, going on to the internet and you type in Thorium Remix 2013, there's a series of films that my friend Gordon has been producing. He did a Kickstarter a couple of years ago, and I actually kicked in to help with that Kickstarter, and so he's been funding these films that he puts up on the internet on advanced energy, and he's got this chart up on there. But it's just by and far, if you look at the data, nuclear power is one of the safest methods going. even when you factor in Chernobyl, which was a terrible accident at a Soviet-era military reactor, and even the Fukushima problem, and even the 3 Mile Island problem that happened in Pennsylvania back in the 70s when Carter was president. That accident was completely contained. Nobody was exposed to radiation in the plant, and there was a slight venting of gas, but we're exposed to radiation all the time, just like when coal gets burned. And in fact, I would be willing to. I would bet all my vehicles, the titles of all my vehicles, that the Oberlin College coal plant has emitted more radiation than in the same time that Davis-Besse out west of us has emitted into the environment.
And let's be clear that in drawing a comparison of that nature, that's
right.
Not to say that either one has emitted much at all. But relatively speaking, compared to each other, coal burning, you're saying, emits more than
coal does, because just in the nature of coal, you've got uranium, and you've got natural uranium, and you've got natural thorium in there that goes up the stack, as well as the mercury, the arsenic, all the other stuff that goes up the stack, and the fine particulate. So, there have been no deaths, fatalities from nuclear power in this country, but there's 13,000 deaths a year from the burning of coal from any number of sources and accounting methods and everything. And there were 7 deaths in I was just looking at some charts from the the International Atomic Energy Commission, and they had charts on deaths and accidents at reactors. The Japanese had a couple of accidents where 7 people died, but that was in the early 2000s. And nobody's died at Fukushima. It's like, in fact, there have been the radiation exposures have been so low that statistically there's going to be no chances of anyone getting cancer, according to the International Atomic Energy Commission and a lot of other independent sources and everything. But you wouldn't hear this reading it in the press and everything. So talking about nuclear energy generally, right.
Then where does thorium fall in that?
Thorium is really freaking interesting. It's uranium and plutonium are fissionable in and of themselves. Thorium, when you take regular, and it's ubiquitous, it's all over the place, but you find it when you mine rare earths and when you find old outwash plains that had rare earth minerals in the mountains, and you find there's sand deposits. So you can go to like beaches in Florida, out in Missouri and whatnot, and dig up thorium and then mine it. But it's element 90 on the periodic table, and it's not fissionable in and of itself, but it is fertile, which means it will accept a neutron that will bump it up to artificial uranium-233. And once you have uranium-233, you can then burn that in a thermal spectrum reactor. So in a slow neutron reactor, most of the reactors we have are fast neutron reactors. And so they're going to be burning higher grade uranium and plutonium, higher energy plutonium and everything. But you can do really well with thorium. And here's the connection that I just found out just recently. Another thorium associate of mine, Kirk Sorensen, and he's the guy that found the lost book of fluid-fueled reactors when he was working at NASA in the early 2000s, and he was working at NASA Huntsville, and they were trying to come up with it was a speculative venture where they were trying to game out how they would power settlements out on the planet or the moons of Jupiter and Saturn and everything. So you're too far from the sun to use effective solar. You're too far away to use fuel cells. It's going to have to be nuclear reactors. So they were gaming out what kind of reactor system they would use for heat and for power for the base and for the human habitated base. And NASA's built and tested all kind of reactors for decades, and they use them. And but he was in this buddy's office, and he saw this book, Fluid Fueled Reactors. So he grabs it off the shelf and he looks at it. It's like 1958 Atomic Energy Commission, and he asks his buddy, he's like, "Hey man, what's this?" And fluid fueled reactors, I've never heard of this. And he says, "Man, when I was in college," he says, "I was an intern at Oak Ridge National Labs in Tennessee, and they were surplusing that book, and I just grabbed it. I never read it, but yeah, go ahead if you want to read it. Go ahead, read it." So he took it home. And he was like me with like a Stephen King novel and stuff. He grabbed that thing and he read that book straight through. It took him 4 days, and he'll tell you, he said, "I got done with that thing, and I only understood a third of it, but I came away thinking, why didn't we do this?" And so he started studying it more, and he kind of did this. He actually got a little bit of funding from NASA because he found out that Oak Ridge National Labs had done these tests for these thorium breeder reactors. And it was an outgrowth of a really crazy idea in the 50s where the Air Force wanted, to back up, the Navy was looking at nuclear reactors as a power system for submarines because we were going to be going toe-to-toe with the Ruskies, and they thought that nuclear power reactors could be a way to power a submarine and not have to worry about burning diesel, which is what they were doing at the time. And theoretically, you could seal up a ship, provision it with crews, and then be able to make your own oxygen, electricity, and heat and everything, and propulsion, and then just go out and stay underwater for months at a time. And so they commissioned Admiral Hyman Rickover to go to work with people at Oak Ridge National Labs to develop these shipboard reactors, in which they did. And they put the first nuclear reactors in submarines in the 50s. But at the same time, the Army was getting reactors as a way to power bases, and then the Air Force, they're sitting back and they got their bombers and their fighters, and they're like, well, how come they get reactors, Congress, and we don't get reactors? We want reactors too. So they came up with this idea: why don't we power a jet bomber with a nuclear reactor? Because what does fuel do in a jet? So you power up, you take a jet, you have a turbojet, and you put kerosene in there, and you light the kerosene, and then that heats things up, and then that spins a turbine, and then you got that heat, that thrust going out. So the idea was, why don't we eliminate the petroleum fuel to heat the gas, and we just heat air with a nuclear reactor? So it got tasked to Oak Ridge National Labs, and a guy named Alvin Weinberg, Dr. Alvin Weinberg, he was running the Oak Ridge National Labs at that time. And when you read his autobiography, he says, when we were tasked with this, he said, an aircraft reactor experiment, he said, it was, when you thought about it, it was not really a good idea. I mean, putting a reactor in a bomber and then flying it around for weeks at a time, it's not really a good idea. But the engineering possibilities of this machine are going to be so radical that it could in and of itself be a really interesting thing to study. And so they did that. And then they did some test reactors in the 50s. They wrote up some reports, and then they looked at doing some more, and there was a study that was done for the Kennedy administration in 1962, where they were looking at how are we going to take nuclear power and advance it to the next level. So there were people that were saying, let's go with fast reactors, and then let's go with the slow neutron reactors. And then Oak Ridge got tasked with doing a molten salt experiment reactor. So the difference, the game changer with these thorium reactors, is that it's not a solid fuel. So in the nuclear reactors that we have right now, they're solid fuels, they're pellets that are often in steel tubes of zirconium or other metals, and then they get packed into assemblies, and then they get put into the reactors, and then they're cooled, typically with water, pressurized water, and then that water is the heat transfer unit and everything, and then they'll take that water and it gets turned into steam, and then high-pressure steam, because in order for water to accept more heat from the reactor, you got to put it under high pressure, like 1,000 psi or more, and which is why you have these gigantic containment buildings around the reactors and everything. It's like, yeah, they will protect from an airplane slamming in to the reactor, but also you need this big containment to hold this super hot steam if it ever got loose and everything. You need, because it's going to flash to 1,000 times the volume and everything. So the big fear in a solid fuel reactor is meltdown. If it gets too hot, if you lose coolant, your fuel cells are going to melt. And so the thinking with the fluid-fueled reactor was that you would add the fuel to a carrier fluid that would be a molten salt. And these things are usually solid at 400 Celsius, which is above the steam temperature in a pressurized water reactor. So it's going to be solid, so you're going to have to use an electric furnace to liquefy it, and then once you have it liquid, then it's going to start reacting. And then all you have to do is add a little bit more uranium to it, or a little bit more uranium to it, and then if the reaction doesn't have enough the fluid-fueled reactor, if it doesn't have enough uranium, it's going to slow down, and it's going to solidify, and the reaction's going to solidify. And then also the geometry of the tank is such that if you've got enough uranium in there, it's going to hold, and you're going to have this neutron density so that the reaction's going to continue and everything. But if you change the shape, that's going to kill the reaction. So for as much work as you have to do on a traditional solid fuel reactor, you got to do a lot of stuff right to keep it from melting down, from blowing up, all this kind of stuff, which we do a fantastic job of doing. The U.S. Navy they've done a fantastic job of running submarines and cruiser ships and aircraft carriers with reactors for 60 years. And the fleet that we have right now of 104 reactors generating power, 20% of America's power comes from this fleet of reactors. They've done this spectacularly safe, and but you're doing a lot of stuff to keep the reaction from falling apart. There's a lot of controls, multiple layers of controls. You need to do as many controls in a fluid-fueled reactor to keep the reaction going. So that's the inherent safety of the system. So,
and that, kids, is why you want to stay in school.
That's exactly right. It's fascinating stuff. You're learning engineering, you're learning materials, you're learning physics, you're learning chemistry when you're dealing with fluid-fueled reactors. So.
Watching you gesture, it also looks like you're looking to cook a little bit, putting that little bit of uranium up there and adding that in.
It's like I do have a little Italian in me, so but
This is WOBC Oberlin 91.5 FM, Oberlin College and Community Radio. You're listening to Oberlin. My name is Peter Cummings. My guest today is Scott Medwid, Oberlin Renaissance Man. I'm just going to introduce him everywhere as that. We'll get in one more PSA, and then we'll be back to wrap the show.
Oberlin Community Services is a small community organization helping residents of southern Lorain County meet basic needs.
Our pantry is open from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. and 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. on weekdays.
Eligible residents are welcome to get food once a week. Please bring bags for groceries.
Stop by OCS at 285 South Professor Street to learn more about how we can help.
This message has been brought to you by WOBC, Oberlin College and Community Freeform Radio.
Oh, okay. No, I was gonna say something, but go ahead.
Well, so with hemp and thorium now, and again, I come to you for my science education from now on many of these things.
And I will say Wikipedia.
Right. Let's just wrap into the mix that you're also a beekeeper.
Yes.
Yeah. So as I'm standing out in one yard and talking across a garden plot of whatever it might be in a given year, you keep bees. How long have you done that? Are you currently doing that?
I unfortunately this long winter, my bees that I got as a swarm last year, they died out. So they and it must have been I figure sometime in early January. They just froze out. And so, yeah, I've got a package ordered from Queenwright Colonies in Spencer, Ohio, and your complete beekeeping supplier for the northern Ohio area. And but I'll get 3 pounds of bees and a queen that'll come in at the end of April, and then I'll put them in my box, and we'll go again. So, but
because your last one went from bees to bins.
It went, yeah. You know, I got the swarm, and they didn't even put enough honey out to get a crop for me to take the honey,
right.
Because in this area you got to leave about 60 to 70 pounds of honey in the box so that the bees can have food through winter and everything. And but in answer to your question, back around 2000, Ken Sloan, who used to be on city council here, he's used to be he is still a piano tuner, but he was the piano tuner for the Oberlin Conservatory. He conned me into being on the board of the Oberlin Sustainable Agriculture Project back when OSAP had the farm out at the old Lodge Farm on Pyle, South Amherst Road, north of town here. And so I went out, and I said, "Yeah." He's like, "I come from a kind of a farming background."
This is you talking.
This is me talking, yeah. And I said, and I'm walking around out there with some of the OSAP people and their grower, and it's like, man, there's like 5 acres of really great crops. Things are looking really good, but it's like I'm not seeing any bees. It's like, man, where's your bees? And he says, "Oh, we don't have bees out here." And so I did a little bit of research. I found out that the Lorain County Beekeepers Association was doing a class at the Ag Center up on the Ohio State Agriculture Extension that's up on.
Sorry, I can't help you.
Yeah, it's like, God.
Oh, is that Oberlin Road?
Airport Road? No, it's the Airport Road. Well, anyhow, it's up there. Huh. And so I took the class there and got my first bees that next year, that summer. And then actually I built it up to my peak was I had 15 bee boxes, bee colonies. And then it got really hard to keep bees because there's just like so many pests that are attacking the bees, and varroa mite, and there's tracheal mite. There's.
It seems like a hard thing to not do, though, as you say you have another colony on order.
Yeah, and that's probably just because I'm so damn stubborn and everything, but I'm just not willing to give up on everything. But I got a couple ideas. The big thing that I've been dealing with right now is small hive beetle, and that's been plaguing a lot of people. And but I'm going to give it a try again, and I'm going to try a different type of queen bee and just see how it goes. So, but.
And what do you do with your honey?
I used to sell it, and as you know, I have taken some of my my harvest from the bees, which is the honey, and used it to make mead.
Absolutely, right.
And I make it with your mom's husband, Pete Richards. So, right. And we're quite the mead makers. So, but. And let me tell you, man, that's some good hooch. So, but
that's a whole nother art form.
That is an art form.
After beekeeping, after hemp growing, or whatever else, just add that one more flavor to your mix as Renaissance super guy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Scott, it's been a real pleasure having you in this week, knowing you for years and talking to my brothers and just getting to stand around on the edge of conversations a lot of times in the neighborhood is probably as interesting and maybe a little safer from my educational lacking sometimes than jumping right in with both feet. This is 91.5 FM, Oberlin College and Community Radio. This is Oberlin, your hour-long discussion every week of anything that's going on in Oberlin. Why? Because I live here, but I don't know enough about what's going on here, so I got to bring people in to tell me about it. Scott, if we haven't hit everything you wanted to touch on, any last comments?
Well, I know you had Eric Nornberg, city manager, in last week, and I've been too busy to get down to City Hall, but my office is right up on Tappan Square. I mean, I'm right downtown and everything, and it astounds me that we haven't gotten garbage cans or the recycling bins back. And it's like I'm going to actually start. And now that we see that the snow's melting, there's all kind of garbage in, but people don't have a place to put their trash, and we don't have a place to put our bike racks. I bike, almost all winter and everything, and I bike and almost all the time I'm biking up to the office, and then parking it out front. But when they did that West College Street project there, which was bad timing, let me tell you that. It really hurt downtown businesses. And but we didn't get the bike racks back, and we didn't get the garbage cans, and that's the big thing. And I know there's a plan, and people are talking about some, taking up some parking lanes or parking spots to put bike racks, which personally I think we need more parking uptown. So okay. We need people come to downtown with their cars from out of town, or transiting from home to, they come back into town from their work outside of town. They'll stop, if there's parking, they'll stop downtown and shop downtown. But a lot of times there's no shopping, there's no room to park downtown. So we need more parking spaces. So I want to see us keep as many parking spaces and get that bike parking back up on the sidewalk where it belongs. So,
well, I wouldn't mind a show discussing downtown parking, biking needs, getting someone from the Planning Commission or the Zoning Board of Appeals, if that's the right name for the board in the city here. A lot of those kinds of issues are real big matters to a lot of local people, and that's who I want to talk to. Next week I'll have Oberlin City Schools Superintendent John Troth on. He'll join me for an hour. I haven't talked to him in detail about programming yet, but I'd like to think we could talk about the IB system that the district is using. I'd like to think that I could bring in some of my kids' homework and maybe he could help me with that. No, well, okay, probably not that. But the math is getting really tough. So I'll be looking somewhere else soon for that, I'm sure. The show is being recorded, and if everything comes out well, will be posted up on YouTube at the Oberlin account. That's OH Oberlin. We're online as a blog at ohoberlin.wordpress.com, on Twitter at ohoberlin, and that's about what I have the energy and the phone power for. So you can hit me up at any of those places, leave comments, suggestions for guests, but feel free, please, to listen in every week here on WOBC 91.5 FM. And Scott, I'll be looking for you around town. The weather's starting to warm up. The snow's melting enough that even if it freezes over again, I'm not going to fear walking around and finding ice, just really, really cold sidewalks. Look forward to seeing you around town.
All right.
Thanks a lot for coming in. And thank to you all for listening.